He thought his badge made him untouchable until the woman he wrongfully arrested walked into court wearing the judge's robe. What happened next didn't just end his career, it changed the entire system. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't swerving. But still, she was stopped. It was a quiet Wednesday morning in downtown Brookdale. The streets were still waking up, a few joggers on the sidewalk, coffee shops opening their doors, and the slow hum of morning traffic filling the air. Melanie Ross, a high-powered attorney known for her calm presence and unshakable logic in the courtroom, was heading home from an early client meeting. She wasn't in a rush. Her speedometer hovered steadily at the legal limit. Her turn signals clicked on precisely at every intersection. She wasn't on the phone. She wasn't distracted. She was, in every sense of the word, doing everything right. Yet still, the red and blue lights began to flash in her rearview mirror. At first, she thought maybe they were for someone else. She instinctively moved her car to the side to let the cruiser pass. But it slowed behind her, matching her pace. Her heart sank. She knew exactly what was happening. She pulled over, calm, controlled, composed. She kept both hands visible on the steering wheel. Rolled down her window slowly. She knew the routine, not just as a citizen, but as a black woman in America. Officer Jack Thurman approached from the driver's side. His reputation had spread far beyond just his department. Aggressive, overly assertive, and rarely questioned. He had a badge, and he wore it like armor. License and registration. He barked, skipping any form of polite greeting. Melanie nodded and handed over her documents without hesitation. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked. "No, officer," she replied, measured and polite. "Routine check," he said vaguely, already scanning the inside of her car with a suspicious eye. Routine. Melanie felt the word hit like a slap. What about her looked suspicious enough to justify a routine check? Her tailored suit? The clean interior of her luxury car? Or was it something else, something as simple as her skin color? But she said nothing. She stayed calm. Then came the demand that made her freeze. "Step out of the vehicle." "Is there a problem, officer? You look nervous. I need you to step out now." That was all he offered. No explanation. No legal basis. Just a thinly veiled assertion of power. Melanie's pulse quickened, but her face showed no fear. She complied because she knew that arguing on the roadside wasn't just dangerous. It was futile. As she stepped out, Officer Thurman pulled out his handcuffs. "What is this about?" she asked, still composed. "You're being detained for suspicious behavior." "You seemed evasive," he replied. "We'll sort it out downtown." "No. Miranda rights. No legal charge. No probable cause. Just authority abused without accountability." Cars passed by slowly, a few drivers staring, some recording. Melanie, once the respected face of legal justice, now stood humiliated on the side of the road, wrists in steel. In that moment, she wasn't Yale Law graduate Melanie Ross. She wasn't a trial expert with a 94% win rate. She wasn't the legal counsel trusted by some of the city's most powerful families. She was just another suspect. And the truth was, this wasn't new. She had heard the stories. She had defended the victims. She had given closing arguments on behalf of the wrongfully accused, wrongfully searched, wrongfully judged. But now, she was living it, and something inside her shifted. She didn't shout. She didn't beg. She watched. She absorbed every detail. The time of day, the words used, the tone in his voice. She took mental notes like she was in court, cross-examining a witness. She knew this wasn't the time to fight back. Not yet, but it would be. Inside the precinct, they held her for over 6 hours. No official charges were filed. No paperwork was processed. Eventually, a supervisor, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, ordered her release. "She checks out," was all they said. Checks out. As if she had been a question mark. A maybe. A threat. They returned her belongings without apology. Without acknowledgement. Just silence. Melanie didn't make a scene. She didn't storm out. She walked, head high, spine straight, out of that building with more dignity than anyone inside could imagine. But she wasn't walking away from the fight. She was walking toward it. What Officer Thurman didn't know, and what he wouldn't realize until it was too late, was that the woman he had arrested was not just another lawyer. She was a litigator who had studied police overreach for years. She was a civil rights advocate with a network of journalists, judges, and federal attorneys on speed dial. She was someone who didn't just understand the law. She could weaponize it, ethically, precisely, and powerfully. And now, she had a personal reason to do so. She didn't yell. She didn't resist. She waited. Melanie Ross sat alone in a cold, windowless holding cell for 6 hours. No phone call. No charge sheet. No one even told her what she was being detained for. She wasn't offered water. No one asked if she needed anything. It was the kind of silence meant to punish, not legally, but psychologically, to humiliate, to make someone feel powerless. But Melanie wasn't powerless. She just looked like she was. She didn't scream. She didn't ask, "Do you know who I am?" She didn't cry or lash out or show weakness. Instead, she watched, quietly, like a chess player reading the board before the first move. The young officer at the desk occasionally glanced at her, a mix of discomfort and confusion on his face. Something didn't sit right with him. This woman didn't act like someone caught doing something wrong. She didn't behave like someone desperate or scared. She behaved like someone waiting for the storm to pass, because she was the storm. Finally, after hours of silence and no evidence to support her detainment, a superior officer walked in and said 5 simple words: "You're free to go now." No explanation, no apology, just go. They handed her belongings back carelessly. Her keys, her phone, her briefcase. She checked them one by one. Silently as she walked out of the precinct, the sun had started to set. The sky outside was orange and gray, a quiet reflection of the fire simmering beneath her cool exterior. She didn't slam the door. She didn't speak to reporters. She didn't even call a friend, because Melanie Ross didn't need noise to fight back. She needed proof. Calculated comeback at home. She powered up her laptop and did exactly what the average person wouldn't know how to do. She filed an official public records request for the bodycam footage from the stop.it was her legal right. She wrote the request in precise legal language, citing state codes and response time limits. It wasn't a rant. It was a surgical strike. Then she filed a formal complaint, not the generic online version civilians use, but a documented, evidence-based brief directly to the Office of Internal Affairs, flagged with attorney-level urgency. She included the time, location, the officer's badge number, and even a list of the civil rights violations that had occurred: unlawful detainment, lack of probable cause, and Miranda rights issued, possible racial profiling. Each point was supported with references to legal precedent. She knew how to write the kind of complaint that made IA departments stop what they were doing and start reading carefully. And while Officer Jack Thurman was out there, still walking around with the smugness of a man who thought he got away with it, Melanie was quietly laying the bricks for his downfall. The right people, the right way, but Melanie didn't stop there. She didn't post online. She didn't tell her story on TikTok or Instagram. Why? Because she didn't want attention. She wanted results. She reached out, privately, to the people who could actually make things move. A state senator she once helped during a re-election campaign, a federal judge she had clerked for years ago, a local journalist known for exposing police corruption, but only when the facts were airtight. To each of them, she said the same thing: "I'm not asking for favors. I'm asking for accountability." And slowly, the machine began to move. The cracks in the armor. Meanwhile, Officer Thurman continued his days like nothing had happened to him. It was just another routine stop. Another moment where he showed who was in charge. Another silent suspect who went away quietly. But the emails were already circulating inside his department. His bodycam footage had been flagged for review. His name had been entered into the Civilian Oversight Committee's active investigation list. The complaint from Melanie Ross, ESQ, was being forwarded up the ladder with the words "requires urgent review" stamped on top. And he still had no idea. He thought he had silenced another voice. But what he had actually done was awaken a woman who knew every inch of the system he thought protected him, and exactly how to hold him accountable with it. The difference between reaction and strategy. That's the difference between people who explode and people who plan. Most would have gone to the press, made noise, demanded justice with hashtags and headlines. But Melanie didn't want 15 minutes of viral fame. She wanted permanent change. She wanted documentation, proof, witnesses, protocol violations, evidence admissible in court, and undeniable. And The eyes of even the most reluctant investigators. Because here's what Officer Thurman didn't realize. He hadn't just cuffed a woman that day. He had handcuffed himself to a mistake that was about to follow him forever. Next time you judge someone, make sure they're not the judge. 2 weeks had passed since Officer Jack Thurman pulled over Melanie Ross and unlawfully placed her in handcuffs. In those 2 weeks, Melanie moved in silence, like a seasoned strategist playing the long game. And now, the board was set. Officer Thurman had received the summons like any other. Nothing unusual. The notice read, Internal Affairs Disciplinary Hearing, Allegations, Racial Profiling, Misconduct, Abuse of Authority. He shrugged it off that he'd been here before. A few complaints, a slap on the wrist. Maybe a temporary suspension, maybe a recommendation for more training. It was routine by now, just paperwork. As he buttoned his shirt that morning, he barely spared it a thought. Another day, another hearing. The badge would protect him. It always had that. He arrived at the courthouse early, walking through the corridors, with the swagger of a man used to respect. Other officers nodded. A few gave sympathetic looks. Another overreaction, one muttered. They're always targeting the good ones. Thurman smirked. Inside the courtroom, the murmur of voices created a low hum. Reporters were not allowed in, but the gallery held a mix of IA representatives, legal observers, and a few high-ranking department officials. No one seemed particularly tense, until it got quiet. Too quiet. Everyone stood as the bailiff called. Out. All rise for the honorable judge presiding. The door behind the bench opened. In walked Melanie Ross. Officer Thurman's eyes locked onto her, and his breath caught in his throat. His knees didn't buckle, but they wanted to. It was her. Not in handcuffs. Not behind a table waiting to defend herself. Not making a complaint. She was the judge, wearing the black robe of authority. She didn't glare at him. She didn't smirk. She didn't need to. Her very presence was louder than any words could ever be. The gallery fell silent. You could hear the shuffle of paper. You could hear the tick of the second hand on the clock above the wall. But what you couldn't hear was Thurman's confidence anymore. The power shift. He blinked, unsure if what he saw was real. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she was here for another case. Maybe. No. The nameplate at the bench was clear. Judge Melanie Ross. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and glanced down at the file before her. Her voice was calm, controlled. Officer Jack Thurman, she said. You're here today to answer formal allegations concerning racial profiling, unlawful detainment, and procedural misconduct. This hearing is being recorded and entered into permanent departmental review. Thurman swallowed hard. His attorney leaned over and whispered urgently, Do not speak unless addressed. Melanie continued reading. She listed the events that had taken place during the stop, word for word, date, time, officer statements, body cam timestamps, and she never once mentioned that she was the victim, because this wasn't about personal revenge. This was about professional justice. The unraveling as Melanie played the body cam footage for the room, the silence thickened. There it was, the footage showing Thurman approaching her vehicle, demanding she step out, cuffing her. No Miranda rights. No explanation. There was no aggression. No raised voice from Melanie. Just compliance and calm questions. And then, 6 hours of detention, off camera, undocumented, unjustified. When the footage ended, Melanie leaned forward and asked, Officer Thurman, can you explain the basis for your request to remove the driver from the vehicle that day? Thurman tried to answer. She seemed nervous, ma'am. Sorry, Your Honor. Melanie didn't blink. Is appearing nervous a crime? No, Your Honor. Was there any evidence of a traffic violation? No. Did she resist in any way? No. Then on what grounds did you detain her? There was no answer. His attorney interrupted with a procedural objection. But it was hollow. Weak. Everyone in the room knew what they had just seen. An abuse of power caught in 1080p. Melanie paused, then looked up. Officer Thurman. She said slowly, clearly. Next time you judge someone, make sure they're not the judge. The words hung in the air like a hammer before it drops. The courtroom didn't cheer. No one clapped, because this wasn't a movie. This was real. This was justice. Behind the robe, and yet, behind the robe, Melanie was still human. As she sat there, presiding over a hearing that had grown deeply personal, She reflected on everything she had felt in that cold holding cell. The humiliation, the sting of injustice, the rage she had to swallow. But she didn't let it show, because today wasn't about getting even. Today was about setting a standard for every young black woman pulled over without cause, for every innocent voice silenced under the weight of a badge, for every person told to be quiet, stay calm, and just take it. This case wouldn't bring headlines. It wouldn't go viral, but it would go on record. It would stay in his file. It would be the first thing they saw when they pulled up his name. Officer Jack Thurman, once untouchable, was finally being held accountable. Final verdict by the end of the hearing, the facts were indisputable. Internal Affairs recommended his immediate suspension pending further disciplinary action. His patrol privileges were revoked. His badge was under review, and criminal charges for unlawful detainment were being considered. Thurman walked out of the courtroom, no longer smirking, no longer sure of anything, that he didn't just lose his case, that he lost his shield because he picked the wrong woman. The courtroom air was still, heavy, but quiet. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the kind that signals something serious is about to unfold. Officer Jack Thurman sat stiffly in his seat, shifting only slightly as the hearing formally began. The smirk he had worn so comfortably earlier was now long gone, replaced by a growing tightness around his jaw. Across from him, Judge Melanie Ross sat tall behind the bench, not vindictive, not smug, but stoic, focused, and in complete control. Her robe framed her like armor. Her eyes, cool and direct, didn't flinch. The hearing was not a trial, but it might as well have been. The gallery behind Thurman was filled with legal observers, internal affairs officers, and a few high-ranking police supervisors who had shown up unexpectedly. Word had gotten around. Something big was happening here, and everyone wanted to see it. Melanie began without drama. Her tone was even, not angry, but precise. Today's hearing concerns Officer Jack Thurman and an incident dated April 6th. At approximately 9:22 a.m., the incident involved a traffic stop that resulted in an unlawful detainment. She paused, not for effect, but to give the words the weight they deserved. She then pulled out a manila folder and began reading. Complaint. Number 00173. March 2021. Subject, aggressive stop without cause. Complaint number 00245. June 2022. Subject, verbal intimidation during a wellness check. Complaint number 00301. November 2023. Subject, unlawful search, later dropped for lack of evidence. One by one, she listed the cases, each dismissed, each labeled insufficient evidence, each brushed aside like they didn't matter. But now, they mattered, because now, the person reading them out loud wasn't a scared civilian or an ignored voice. Now, that voice carried the gavel. Officer Thurman's discomfort grew with every word. His eyes darted toward his attorney, but no help was coming. His name, his badge number, his history, it was all on display, under the harsh light of scrutiny. Melanie continued. These were not isolated incidents. They form a pattern of intimidation, abuse of authority, and in many cases, targeting vulnerable individuals without provocation. Then she looked directly at him for the first time. You judged me before you knew me, she said clearly. But now, let's talk about your record. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. But it shook the room. The mirror he never wanted. Melanie projected the bodycam footage on the courtroom monitor again. As it played, she narrated. Here, the officer states, quote, "You seem nervous." This was the justification for escalating the stop. There was no traffic violation, no contraband, no suspicious behavior, just discomfort. The screen showed her, calm and collected, asking questions respectfully. The screen showed him, growing more impatient, more aggressive, until the cuffs came out. Then silence. The footage ended. No one in the room moved. Not a pen scribbled, not a throat cleared, because they all saw it now. This wasn't about one incident. This was about every single time someone got pulled over, cuffed, or threatened for no reason other than a badge wearer's unchecked ego. And now that ego was sitting in a chair, facing accountability. More than just a badge. Melanie turned again to Thurman. You assumed your badge protected you, she said calmly. You assumed that silence was compliance. That fear meant guilt. That being nervous made someone a suspect. She let that breathe. Then came the heart of it. But your badge only protects you when you honor it, when you live by what it stands for, not when you use it like a weapon. For the first time, Thurman opened his mouth, just slightly, a half-formed excuse. But nothing came out. What could he say? That he didn't mean it? That it was a misunderstanding? He was a man unarmed in a room built on truth, and Melanie had all the truth on her side. The weight of the room behind them. Some observers looked down at their notepads, visibly shaken. A few exchanged glances that said what no one dared speak. Aloud, how many more like this? Melanie addressed the board. I'm not here today seeking punishment out of anger. I'm not even here because of what happened to me personally. I'm here because if someone like me, an attorney, a judge, a public figure, can be treated like this, what's happening to people with no voice at all? She gestured to the file. There is a record here. A long one. And for too long, it was ignored, brushed off, dismissed. But not today. A reckoning in robes. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to, because this was power. Not the kind that comes from a gun or a badge, but the kind that comes from knowing the law and using it to defend, not destroy. Melanie concluded. This isn't vengeance. It's responsibility. And Officer Thurman must be held accountable for violating the oath he swore to uphold. The chairperson from Internal Affairs nodded slowly, finally breaking the silence. We will be moving forward with disciplinary action, she said, including immediate suspension and formal charges pending review. There was no applause, just justice, quiet, deliberate, long overdue. The badge didn't save him, but the law did. The hearing was over, the gavel had fallen, and for the first time in his career, Officer Jack Thurman faced consequences he couldn't wriggle out of. No union defense. Nobody in Internal Affairs to soften the blow. No vague wording in the report to blur the truth. The findings were clear: guilty of misconduct, guilty of racial profiling, guilty of abusing the authority he had sworn to wield responsibly. Within 48 hours of the decision, Thurman was placed on administrative leave. Within a week, he was stripped of his badge, dismissed from the police force, and permanently banned from holding any future law enforcement position across the state. The man who once walked with swagger now walked with his head down. There was no press conference, no apology, just silence. But the silence spoke volumes. Melanie didn't celebrate. She got to work. Melanie Ross didn't smile when she read the final judgment. She didn't post about it online. She didn't bask in the satisfaction of watching a man who tried to humiliate her lose everything, because that wasn't what she was after. This was never about revenge. It was about justice, and making sure it didn't stop with her case. After the hearing, Melanie met with the Civilian Oversight Committee, then the Police Reform Task Force, then the City Council. Within months, she helped pass a citywide policy package that did what others had only talked about: mandatory body cam use, not optional, not partial, but full shift recording with external cloud backups, independent civilian reviewers for all misconduct claims, with no ties to police unions or precinct leadership, annual de-escalation and bias training, certified by third-party ethics boards, not in-house trainers. And perhaps most importantly, the Ross Amendment, a new regulation requiring that all officers with more than 3 misconduct complaints in 5 years be automatically flagged for review by an outside legal team. It wasn't just policy. It was protection for those without power, for those without titles, for those who couldn't walk into a courtroom and defend themselves the way she could. From a courtroom to a catalyst, Melanie's courtroom wasn't just a place for sentencing anymore. It became a platform for change. She began hosting monthly legal clinics at community centers, teaching everyday people their rights during police encounters. She partnered with law schools and civil rights groups to create outreach programs that helped young people of color understand how the system works and how to work within it. To make change, she gave lectures on the power of procedure, not just passion, because, as she often said, emotion can start a movement, but only law can make it last. The message that echoed 1 year after the hearing, Melanie was invited to speak at a statewide judicial ethics conference. The topic was restoring public trust in the legal system. Her opening words silenced the room. The badge doesn't make you untouchable, but your actions can. She explained that trust isn't built by power, it's built by accountability. that justice isn't about who wins, it's about who is heard. And that law is not just a shield for the privileged, but a sword for the silenced, if used correctly. Her story, the case of Jack Thurman, became a model nationwide. Police departments in 3 neighboring states adopted versions of her reform package. Law students began studying the hearing as a landmark example of how to navigate a system that resists change and win anyway. And all of it started because one woman refused to shout and instead chose to strategize. What happened to Thurman? After his dismissal, Jack Thurman disappeared from public view, the NO viral meltdown. No public statements, just resignation. He moved out of state quietly, applied for jobs in security and private consulting, but his name followed him. The hearing was now a matter of public record. His badge number blacklisted. For the first time in years, he had to live like one of the people he used to look down on. Accountable, watchable, vulnerable. The system had finally looked back at him and found him guilty. Legacy over headlines. Melanie was offered book deals, interviews, even a Netflix docuseries pitch. She declined them all. This isn't a story, she said. It's a lesson. Because her goal was never to be famous. Her goal was to make sure what happened to her never happened to someone else. And in that, she succeeded. They thought the badge would protect him. They thought his history would be ignored like always. But this time, the law didn't look away. This time, it looked him straight in the eyes and judged him by the same standards he thought he was above. And the woman he tried to silence? She didn't raise her voice. She raised the bar. Because, in the end, it wasn't her name that mattered. It was what she did with it that changed everything.